So this session today is part of a webinar series that we do every 2 to 3 weeks through CapSource, which is the organization that's hosting it. I'm Jordan Levy, the founder and executive director of CapSource, and I'm actually joined here today by my colleague, close friend, and the director of marketing, Abby Goldenberg. Abby, are you here? Can you say hello?
Yes, hi everyone. It's great to have so many people here today. I think we're reaching about 300 plus, so definitely a very diverse and interesting group of professionals here.
Yeah, we're super grateful. So I just figured we'd start off by mentioning this is definitely one of our largest webinars that we've coordinated to date. You know, to us, it's really an indication that there's a lot of interest in this field of virtual internships. It's also a territory that has not really been decided on yet, whether there's specific forms and functions to these virtual internships, whether there's different expectations. So these are a lot of the questions that we're looking to explore. Of course, as with most internships or most education to work environments, we include both educators and folks from the work environment. So it's a really cool environment that you can ask questions and join a community that really is interested in solving the skills gap together. So we encourage you to say hello. We really want you to participate in the conversation via the chat. So if you'd like, please let us know where you're calling from and how you're doing. We know this is a rough time for a lot of folks. A lot of change is going on in each of our lives, but I think one of the things that we all realize as educators is that we can really support one another. And of course, same for the corporate personnel. If you're in a position to hire folks and build your team, you're really in a position to change people's lives. And so if you want to say hello, we recommend doing that using the chat function. We are incredibly grateful to be joined by an amazing group of powerful women across different types of organizations from different places around the United States. They'll each get a chance to introduce themselves, but I've had the good fortune of knowing most of these women for a number of years and watching them grow and develop incredibly valuable programs and perspectives on helping students transition from education to work. I think that, of course, the future of work looks a lot different now than it probably did 3 months ago, and I think that's one of those concepts that is always changing. And so coming up with ways to keep students informed, engaged, excited is something that we are dedicated to as an organization with CapSource, and I think that's in common with all of the folks that will be speaking today. So again, we'll be doing kind of quick intros, let everyone kind of hear a little bit about who's here and their background and expertise, and then we'll go into some of the guided questions that will ultimately serve as the basis for our conversation. And then if you do have questions, we'll actually be able to discuss those questions throughout the webinar. So we want to make this interactive so that you can really get the answers that you're looking for, because we really do have amazing folks from throughout our community here. And so there's definitely some topics that we have missed, and so we want to include those as well. And then if you stick around for the last 10 minutes, we'll be talking about how CapSource can actually play a role in your virtual internship process if you're interested in help in that regard. So, of course, we work with both schools and companies, and so you'll be hearing the perspective of how to get started from both perspectives. As a quick reminder, we will be doing Q&A through the chat function, as I've mentioned, which will be facilitated by our Director of Marketing, Abby Goldenberg. We also ask that you remain on mute throughout the session so that we can get a crisp recording and share it with all of you so that you can either rewatch it or share it with your colleagues if you found it valuable. If you do have any questions about that, please let us know. We'll always be able to keep in touch with you via email or via the chat throughout this session. So again, I'm Jordan Levy, the founder and executive director of CapSource. You can always feel free to get in touch with me. On the homepage of our website, there's a button that says book a demo, which will land you 30 minutes directly on my calendar to have a conversation about how our experiential learning model, our projects can really add value to your organization. So with that, I want to leave you with a couple of pretty scary statistics to really highlight what exactly is the issue that we're trying to address here today. First and foremost, there's actually two issues. One is, I think, the broader issue, which is the skills gap. What is the skills gap? The skills gap is the distance between where students graduate and what employers are expecting. And in this case scenario, NACE did a survey in 2017 on college seniors. Basically, how many of them are preparing to enter the workforce, and of those, how many feel prepared. And unfortunately, it's not most of them. And so that to us signals that there's really an opportunity here to improve the way that we're educating students and training them for their professional careers. In addition, an even scarier statistic is the one on the bottom, which is most employers do not strongly believe that students are qualified and capable to succeed day one on the job. And so that's a really alarming statistic for us to try and address, because we understand that the college environment is designed to provide a lot of context, but of course the professional environment is very different than typically the types of projects and interactions you're having at a scholastic level. So what can we do in order to build student capabilities and competencies, both soft skills and technical skills? We vote experiential learning. Another option is internships, which is the second problem. So of course, everyone always says, well, that's kind of what internships are for. Well, unfortunately, there's not nearly enough of them. There's almost 20 million college students in the United States alone, and there's less than 1.5 million internships filled every single year. Obviously, most internships are filled by juniors because seniors, after you're done, are supposed to be, transitioning to full-time work, which I think we all know is becoming more and more of a challenge now that the pandemic situation has impacted our economy. So we're going to be talking a lot about the role of institutions in this process. I think they can play a key role in creating more internships, and that's really what we aim to help with. So with that, I'll transition to Alicia, who's an incredible mentor and friend. She's a speaker, a TED talker. She's an entrepreneur, an advisor, and she really focuses a lot on the future of work. So we asked her to join us here today to be a part of the discussion. Alicia, give us a little introduction on your background and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Jordan, so much for inviting me to be here. I am so excited about this conversation because now, if there were ever a moment to talk about this, it is now. My name is, thank you, Alicia Abate. I am an entrepreneur, an advisor, an educator, and I got into this space. I left the corporate world now 6.5 years ago. And before I left the corporate world, I had spent most of my career in some way, shape, or form recruiting, scouting, hiring, interviewing, finding great talent all over the world. And I did that by running global recruiting for Anheuser-Busch InBev. I ran global recruiting for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And I left the corporate world as a VP of HR, initially to solve for the problem, why are people not happy and engaged at work? Those numbers are just about as abysmal as the internship and the preparation numbers that Jordan shared. So I set about solving that challenge, and in the midst of that, began to see some macro trends that are impacting the world, the way it works, and more interestingly, at least from my point of view, what work means and how people will find their fulfillment through it. So the last 4 years, I've been solely dedicated to answering questions related to the future of work. And I do that now by advising Fortune 500 companies, advising early stage startups on how to solve for these challenges, and really helping organizations, both educational and for-profit, understand what they need to do to prepare for this future. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining. We're all very fortunate to be hearing your perspective here today, Alicia, so thank you so much. The next speaker that we'll be introducing is one of CapSource's clients and actually one of the longest running mentors we've had. It's actually the second webinar we're joined with Graziella Fusaro. She previously was an associate dean at the College of Management at Long Island University, which she also brought us in to help with experiential learning, and now she is the amazing Innovation Center Director at Adelphi University. So Graziella, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. I think it's downhill from that now. So we've been working with CapSource I've been working for many years in different capacities. And we've been very lucky to develop this relationship. It really facilitates experiential learning from a university standpoint. Talking a little bit about my background, as Jordan said, I am currently responsible for the Innovation Center at Adelphi. I also founded a nonprofit called ICON that does experiential learning in project-based consulting in many countries. We are today in 8 countries. We've done almost 200 projects. We have about 200 students engaged each year in that company. So I'm very focused on experiential learning. Talking a little bit about my background, I've been in academia for the last 5 years, but prior to that, I was in the corporate side. I built a career for 20 years in investment banking and in strategic consulting. I worked in many companies such as PwC, A.T. Kearney, Citibank, and others. So given that corporate experience, I do think that the area that I most add value now is to, again, bridge that gap that Jordan mentioned in the beginning, to create opportunities for academia to connect with outside partners and create those experiential learning opportunities. So that's right on my area of interest here. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So with that introduction, I think I'm going to pass to Nell. I think she's the next one to introduce herself, right?
Yes.
Indeed. Thanks, Graziella. Thank you, Jordan. So great to be here. My name is Nell Derek-Debevoise. I am the founder and CEO of Inspiring Capital, which I started 7 years ago. A very similar path or spirit, at least, as what you've both said. Alicia, I couldn't agree more that the dismalness that people have about their work is just heartbreaking to me. I say that I would be incredibly lazy and unproductive if I didn't love what I was doing. And on the other hand, as anyone around me would say, I'm actually quite the workaholic because I'm so passionate about what I am doing every day. And I have a really strong belief and 20 years of experience studying human development and practicing it, from Tokyo classrooms to Palestine refugee camps to New York boardrooms, and believe that purpose and the motivation that it brings is completely universal. It's not limited to Peace Corps volunteers or nonprofit staff members. It can be found in those investment banks, at marketing firms, in restaurants, across the entire economy. And so I'll share more why I think that matters for internships and virtual ones especially. But by way of background, I worked in the nonprofit space globally in human development from Tokyo to Europe to Palestine, the Middle East, and Africa for 10 years before coming back to New York about 10 years ago. Went to business school and studied this notion of human development in that context at Columbia and London business schools, and started my company 7 years ago. And we've been running virtual and in-person experiential learning programs since then, all in this space of impact and doing well by doing good.
Thanks so much, Nell. And so we're really excited here to be joined by Natasha, who's new to the CapSource community, to talk a little bit about her perspective as EY shifts to a fully virtual internship experience, which I know is very new to them.
Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. Good to be with you today. I oversee all of our entry-level and intern hiring for EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young. I work side by side with our business leaders to drive our overall hiring strategy. So how do we attract, engage, and hire over 9,000 students and entry-level intern positions across the U.S. firm? My background has been primarily HR, talent acquisition, really focused on entry level. I love this piece of the pie. It always provides a tremendous, great number of challenges. And now more than ever, probably the biggest challenge that I've ever encountered in my day-to-day working world. We're now designing a fully virtual summer internship for 3,300 interns this summer across the US at EY. So yeah, look forward to the discussion and yeah, hearing from a lot of you. So thank you.
Yeah, and it's incredible to hear that EY is persevering here and continuing to offer an internship program, because we know that there are lots of companies struggling even to keep the lights on, let alone bring in new talent and provide excellent learning experiences. So we're very grateful to get your perspective, because we know it's a large lift to get things off the ground at EY in a dynamic that's fully virtual, and it's definitely unique to this year and the economic situation. So with that, we'll transition to kind of a really interesting way to start the discussion, which is kind of why is an internship important for organizations to offer? Of course, we always encourage companies to connect with the next generation, because if you want to stay relevant, you have to stay in touch, because very soon they're the major part of the economy. So I know Nell just recently wrote an article about this. So take it away, Nell. Let us hear from you.
With pleasure. Yeah, we figured that we would just start knowing that some folks are actually new to the internship concept and haven't offered it before, with why do them? Why offer an internship? And so, I think it's a pretty broad term. I don't think that there's necessarily a scientific definition. And we actually help facilitate internships for college students as well as graduate students, but also mid-career and encore career re-enterers. So the intern movie that came out a few years ago, right, was a great showcase of interns in your 60s. So, I really think it boils down to just a short-term work experience designed to build capacity, right? And to help people on their professional journey, particularly in this time when, statistics show that or young professionals coming up today will have 12 different careers, right? Not 12 jobs, 12 different careers in their life. And so universities, you're doing an amazing job of helping people prepare for that, but there's nothing like the work experience, right? And so with that amount of flexibility and transition over time, I think internships have just become more and more important. I would say not to be intimidated by the length or the economics or the duration, right? There's a ton of ways to structure internships depending on who you are, what your company is, what your needs are, and what you're looking to do. Or similarly as a university, what you're looking to offer students. And then specifically the article I wrote just recently, given where we're at, it was this point around the kind of virus proofing, right? And so that speaks specifically to running internships remotely, whether you're doing that now because of COVID or whether you choose to do it that way in the future. And so my 4 points on this are really best practices, I think, that always serve. And the first one is to start onboarding now. So if it's now, looking forward to summer, or if it's July, looking forward to the fall, just to really start building the relationship with that intern and your team. That can be both formal, helping them read background about your company, what they might be doing, and informal, right? Looping them into whatever virtual happy hours or other, remote get-togethers you're having, so that they start to feel part of the team and understand your culture. The second piece is really designing a clear project. So, the worst case image I think that we all have is of an intern kind of awkwardly lurking in the corner or at someone's desk, maybe grabbing coffee or, trying to make copies. Not a good experience for anyone. And so really thinking about what is that project that they're going to work on in a clear frame. Third, building and training and development. I know, Natasha, it sounds like you all are doing a magnificent job of this, really building a cache of resources, videos, talks, documents to read, exercises, activities, webinars that your interns can use along the way to enhance their learning. And finally, we feel really strongly about this having a cohort of peers. So I say more about how you can do that in the article. You don't have thousands of interns like an EY. And just really thinking about that peer learning that can happen. It's cheap and easy for you as the employer. Just by connecting people with their peers, they can learn and share the dreams
You gotta knock it off.
the obstacles that they bump into. And just as a final note, what I'll say about all of this and internships in general is that these are all really good practices for human development and professional development for all of your employees. And so a final plug that I'll give for internships is that it helps develop good HR and talent practices that can benefit all the people in your organization and set up that talent function as well as building your talent pipeline.
Well said, Nell. I love it. I think it's never too early to start prepping for an internship. And also, I think I always put a big, I put summer internship, the summer part in italics, because I don't think that internships only need to live in the summer. I think students are looking for these opportunities all year round. I highly always encourage folks to think a little bit differently about the projects that they assign to their students. If they can stand alone and really kind of act as like a research assignment, the students are engaged and productive throughout that experience, but they don't require as much maintenance. And also another caveat there is, does it have to be full time? A lot of students have other things that they need to work on, whether it's summer classes or other jobs that might be able to produce income. But just because the financial component can be challenging for companies doesn't mean that needs to be a barrier to provide a meaningful learning experience for students. So thank you so much, Nell. I thought that was really wonderful. I think this brings up a really good point, especially when it comes down to paid versus unpaid. What is the role of the institution in this world, in this dynamic that is internships, especially now that we're heading into this fully virtual world that's full of uncertainty, and I think there's no one better to speak to that than Graziella, so take it away.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to touch upon many points that Nell just mentioned. So currently the Innovation Center at Delphi, we joined forces with the Career Service to manage the internship process, and it's not only going to be the summer, as Jordan mentioned, the fall internships, now that we went virtual, they can happen in the fall as well. So historically, the role of the university has been somewhat limited during the internship process. So usually the university, they help finding companies, prospecting those companies, matching the students with the company, and sometimes in case of credit internships, evaluating the learning outcomes of that internship later. However, we do think that in this new reality of remote work, the university needs to innovate that process and to participate throughout the entire duration of the internship to make sure it's a valuable experience for the students and for the company. So we created some changes to the traditional model. Our first big change was a project-based instead of task-oriented internships. So for the employers that are joining here today, we know that most times when you are doing an in-person internship, employer gives a task to a student in a daily basis or sometimes in a weekly basis, but it's very rare that they have an entire project that they know day one what they're going to do for that entire summer. So what we're doing now is working with employers before the internship starts to define a project-based approach. So what's going to be the scope of that internship? What's the goal? What they're going to deliver? And we're trying to break that into weekly deliverables also, so that we as a university will manage that as well. So we're going to have checking points, milestone meetings with the students to see if are able to navigate that project-based approach approach, if there is some changes that are needed as we progress throughout the weeks during the summer. So again, that's the first change. We understand that a lot of companies like Ernst Young, who is a larger company and have the capacity to plan that, are doing that as well. But that's not the reality of most employers. We understand that most employers need someone like me from a university standpoint that has experience in project management to help them put together that project management scope. We also moved it from an individual internship to a team internship. And there's two reasons for that. The first one, we understand that no employer can stay in a video conference with a student 8 hours a day. And on the other hand, there's all of us, I think, not only students, all of us are feeling very isolated in our houses, in our homes. So we want to attack that and reduce that feeling of being lonely and promote a more collaborative environment like they would have if they would be in person. So a team internship allows that to happen. They might be communicating among the team of students at some point. They might be communicating with employers at another time during the day. So that was a second big change. And lastly, I think one last point is to make sure that we have an intense mentorship process throughout the program. So it's sometimes might be perceived because we're changing to virtual and we're changing to a project base that this becomes a capstone project. And we don't want that to happen. We want them to be able to build up that social skill component that's so important in an internship. So an internship, it's important for the students to practice their analytical skills, but also to build the social skills that they're going to need so deeply in the future. So in order for that to happen, we're asking employers to really monitor in a day-to-day the relationship with the students. We think that if we put all of that in place, we're going to benefit from a virtual internship in ways that we weren't benefiting with in-person internships. So a first one is including international students. So I know everyone in the universities here, we all have this problem of how to place international students due to CPT restrictions and others. So a virtual internships, depending how you organize it inside your institution, you can avoid some of the CPT regulation problems, and also geographic location distance, right? A lot of students had to, when the dorms closed, they went back to their hometowns, and how are they going to do those internships now? So the remote one also helps with that situation. A second point is digital literacy about remote work. So I did a project last year for one of the big four accounting firms with that non-for-profit icon. And one of the things that was very clear as an outcome of the project is that even though the students are very prepared to connect socially using all the social platforms digitally, they're not prepared to work in a digital environment, to collaborate in a digital team. And this was all prior to COVID-19. So, many companies, especially service business, were already working with remote teams. So this is going to give them an opportunity to raise the game. And finally, it's a resume builder. So there is a lot of those junior students where the junior internship now would be key for them to be prepared for that interview in the fall or spring for their final job. So we don't want them to miss in that opportunity. They need their experience. It's going to be important for them to be prepared and be positioning for the full-time internship. So this is what I think is the role of the university. And Jordan, if you want to take it from here for the next question.
Yeah, I think this is a really good way of kind of formulating down what we can do as kind of institutions for students as they're transitioning to work. And I think now looking at it the other way, what are companies doing to try and accommodate students, knowing that they're also kind of encountering this kind of two-sided arrangement where their institutions are stepping in to help. They're offering summer courses that are industry integrated and project-based. So this is a really great opportunity for Natasha to share a little bit about what EY is doing to make this internship unique and valuable, but also different from the traditional model that they offer.
Yeah, thank you. These are certainly incredibly unique and challenging times for all of us on, many levels, personally and professionally. So when I think about the impact to the traditional internship, absolutely all aspects of the experience that we're providing will change and will shift. And we are moving to a fully virtual experience across the US for all of our interns. We realize it's important to be clear and concise and not have them not increase their anxiety and changing the rules kind of midway through. So we've really committed to a fully virtual experience for all of our interns. And that means from the very beginning, we're going to run a webinar before they even start to really start to lay out our expectations and operating remotely. And what does that look like? How do they team and work with these professionals at EY in a remote setting? So we're going to kick things off very differently than we've ever done before by just being clear and concise and transparent on the world that they're going to be working in for their internship this summer. We're shifting all of our onboarding and learning. We're starting to work with our client teams to help them to start to think through how will they engage and connect in authentic and real ways with their interns. We're looking at some project work. So Graziella, you'll be very happy. We're also looking at project work. We're looking at cohorts where they can really team together to work on different projects, and these may specifically be tied into some of our client work. We also know that can encourage networking, building relationships, and that's important. And one of the things that we've got to think differently about is what do they do with their free time? Because when you're not physically connecting in an office at a client location, we've got to think about how to fill that time. And we know there'll be some fatigue, right? Being focused and looking in your laptop. So we are talking about purposeful led work, mindfulness, really thinking about their health and well-being and setting real and reasonable expectations for the workday. Because we know that it's not reasonable to expect somebody to be engaged 7-8 hours a day looking at their screen. And so how do we encourage just their general health and wellness throughout this experience? And one of the last things that I'll mention too is we're looking at probably upwards of 70 to 80 hours of what I will call flexible content. So whether it's skill building, as we know that Gen Z is incredibly enthusiastic about, whether it's the purpose-led workshop, whether it's a focus on health and wellness, we're building out approximately 70 to 80 hours of self-directed, self-selected learning content that they can use and leverage when they've got some downtime. So if their client team says, I'm not ready for you, Jordan, today, call me tomorrow, they are not stuck and feeling lost. They've got one place to go where they can leverage a whole host of, whether it's topics specific to upskilling or material that we can provide to help them in their overall career aspirations or development. So there's nothing that's not changing. And you'll laugh, Jordan, I think both you and Abby said, can you send me your slides? And I said, we're working on it because we are literally building this, and we have calls every day to bring this concept of a virtual experience to life in a cool and unique way. So we've got to look at technologies we can leverage. We've got to be mindful of that fatigue that they could suffer. And we've got to get them excited about this very unique experience and the skills that they're going to build during this, incredibly challenging time.
Thank you so much for sharing.
A lot in development. Absolutely.
Yeah, and also for providing an opportunity to segue into our next topic, which really is about technology. And I think one thing that you've mentioned that was kind of exciting is that, this is definitely going to be different than the traditional internship that you offer. So I had an opportunity to participate in a Big Four internship when I was a junior, rising senior. And, from my perspective, it was like almost going to business school in 8 weeks, and like what can you accomplish as a young professional in that short amount of time. And it was so much about building relationships and building new skill sets and starting to understand a new industry and how to operate as part of a team or part of a bigger organization. And so I see pieces of that all coming to fruition through the new plan, but it's going to be a really tough thing to really assemble, at least so that it resembles the original experience of the internship. So I think a large part of that is this concept of technology tools. And I think Alicia, has been keeping track of these types of tools and the, how we collaborate, how we communicate, how we project manage and track. So Alicia, if you don't mind, we'd love to hear your perspective on, what types of technologies might actually move the needle in providing a better student experience this summer.
Yeah, this is such a wonderful question because the entryway is the technological components, and I'll get to that in just a second. However, I think there's two ways to think about that plus a third human component. The first piece is looking at hardware. So coming into this conversation and thinking about virtual internships, one of the assumptions that could be had is that people have their own laptops or have access to Wi-Fi at home or have access to Wi-Fi at home that it has a broadband that's big enough in order to hold this many virtual conversations and video conversations. And that's not necessarily the case for everybody. So especially, and not necessarily talking about companies like UI that have this kind of infrastructure, but others who are new to the game, thinking about your students' needs in the space of this to make sure that they have the hardware that they need and the access point that they might need wherever they might be virtually in the world. And the second piece is, of course, the software piece. So Abby, do I have control of the screen here? Awesome. Thank you for showing this. So Abby, I think generously put together this amazing slide here to talk through and walk through some of the technological logistics. And these are the things that will operationalize many of the components that Natasha's been talking about, that Nell was sharing. How students are going to connect, how they're going to do their work, how you can create community, how you can engage their creativity in building things for the projects that they're doing. And so this goes from, of course, text communication and how people are communicating with each other, scheduling, which if you are an organization that has internal Outlook or Microsoft Teams or Google Calendar, whatever it is that you're using, if you don't have that, these are the kinds of questions that you want to be thinking about right now. Video communication, Zoom is amazing, and it might not be the solution for your organization for a series of security reasons or connectivity reasons or other things. So looking at and seeing and knowing what your other options are can be important. Tools like, of course, graphic design, the variety of host of website builders, project management and collaboration. This is key, I think, particularly for if you are doing project-based kinds of work. You'll want to get familiar with this so that you can both set your students up for success and kind of keep an eye on what's going on there. You want to think about how you're sharing files. Again, the surveys piece can be both for intern satisfaction and for creating research in the marketplace, and of course, email and data analysis. So these are, when you look at this soup of technology or these technological logistics, the question that you really want to be answering is, what are the students going to be up to, and what are the tools that we can utilize to support them in successfully completing that, while keeping an eye on, so you don't want to lose the lens toward risk mitigation. If you're creating things outside of a secure company network, you want to ensure that the tools that you're using are going to keep your data safe. So this is sort of the alphabet soup of what this can look like, and a wonderful way to break down the various components that will enable success and interaction. And then thirdly, I wanted to address the human piece to this, which Natasha began to touch on in her conversation, and Jordan kicked off our conversation with, which is that many students have never had a professional working experience like this before. And so being clear about the difference between there's a distinction between expectations and agreements, but understanding and moving from the point that students may have never had to think about utilizing WordPress inside of a corporate environment and the pluses and minuses of security focus or corporate etiquette or conversation or these kinds of things. So being clear in what is professional decorum as we use these items, what is available for sharing across our own social media and what is only for corporate, and what are, we'll take the ABC journalist who was caught on camera with his boxers on, basically suit on top and boxers on the bottom. What do we need to be paying attention to so that people show up to work in a way that's reasonably professional? So as you think about these technology pieces, there's the first piece, which is the hardware. Can people even get into contact with you? Second piece, all of this beautiful technology that will enable success with an eye toward security. And then thirdly, ensuring that we aren't anchored in our own understanding and, of decades or years of professional experience, and remember that this might be some people's first time in the game. So wanting to help them set up for success in that way as well.
Thank you so much, Alicia. So first and foremost, we agree. We think this slide definitely highlights a lot of categories, but if you think we're missing any, definitely drop those in the chat. We are in the midst of putting together an article about the tools and technical resources that you could use to really do a great job on projects. And I think this is just, from what we've seen so far, doing, close to 300 projects over the last few years. But we're very interested to hear from you if we're missing any specific ones within categories or new categories entirely. I think the human piece is something that both the corporates in the room can understand, as well as the educators. I often say that educators are sculpting, and then the employers that are hosting interns are really sanding down really what it is to be a professional, because certainly we've seen a lot of students kind of they're trying to figure out who they are as they're emerging from their degree programs into the professional environment. And hopefully by the time they get there, they've been through a few virtual meetings like this, so they understand how to conduct themselves and when to unmute and when to share. And I think that's a really big part of being a professional in the 21st century. So I think another really great question here is, how do you prepare the internal team? I know a lot of folks, are operating with teams. Obviously, there are lots of priorities, but how do you get the team members engaged and excited to serve this function as an intern mentor or a facilitator of projects? And I think, Natasha, we'd love to hear from you, kind of how are you guys doing that at EY?
Yeah. I think one of the themes that I know we've really stayed grounded in is, what can we do? So it's really easy to focus on the 300 things that we can't do or that will look and feel incredibly different. But we've been really, at EY and everybody on the line, everything is different. But we've really leaned in to what we can control and the experience that we can provide. And so that has been a lot of our core messaging as we speak to the business and make our recommendations around the intern program. As we prepare our professionals, we're really asking them to lean in that this is going to be an incredibly, the intern class of 2020 will talk about this for years because it will be so unique. And I know our interns are very grateful. So we're doing a lot to prepare. So we're really talking to all of our counselors and peer advisors because we're still running a performance-based internship. We're not taking our foot off the gas because it's incredibly important to us. So we're setting clear and concise parameters around our plans for the interns, and it being performance-based and us expecting them to contribute. Again, it will look different, but what can we provide and how can we manage that? So we're working not only with all of our recruiting teams to prep for the experience, we're leveraging technologies, and we're setting clear and concise expectations with our teams. And it's not our responsibility to manage every minute, right? It's really, again, to look at the whole experience, focus on the options within that time period, and empower our interns to really take the bull by the horns, right? They don't have to sit around and wait to hear from Natasha for guidance. Here's the 70 to 80 hours of self-guided learning. So again, empowering our interns that yes, things are different, but we still have a set of expectations, and let's really lean in to the experiences that we can provide.
So what about the students? How do we prep the students, Graziella, for this experience that they're coming up with?
So again, the universities will have to jump in here and take a more active role. What we are doing at Adelphi, we are having the students start 1 week with the Innovation Center prior to the starting date with the employer. So we are hosting really large sections of training, week-long training to prep them, talking about all the things that Elisha said about hardware and software and communication platforms, knowledge depository platforms. We're even going a little further. When I map the scope of a project with an employer, I'm already also mapping which are the key technology requirements for student success in that employer, because I don't want the students to spend the first week of their internship learning how to communicate or how to share a file or where to find information. So when we're doing that onboarding process in our innovation center, we are already telling them your project scope is going to be this is the technology component, and making sure that they have downloaded the apps, the software, everything that they need to work with that particular company. Another thing is that we are training them. I think all the innovation centers, incubators in every single school does a lot of project-based activities. So we have our project management frameworks. So they have an entire week of training on project management, how to manage a scope, how to manage the deliverable. And that's part of the internship program. We are also onboarding all the projects. We use Microsoft 365, Teams, and SharePoint to share as our knowledge depository for project management. So we're uploading all the projects on that depository also, so that we can teach them how to interact using those tools. But also for us, it's good for us to manage the internships and making sure that everything is progressing as expected. So again, very active role of the universities in this virtual internship program.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a crucial piece of the puzzle, and I think one of the main reasons why all of the programs that we've worked on with Graziella go so smoothly is because the institution takes a very important role in ensuring that the students are up to speed and feel like they're on track to succeed. So I think, kudos to you guys at the Innovation Center. Really, drop of a hat, we're, putting together dozens of projects for students across the institution from any different major. And so there's a lot of different projects that have tons of different nuances and scopes to it, but the consistency is there in terms of length, in terms of rigor. And so I think it's a really important piece that the institution can bring. So I want to wrap up here with an opportunity to talk a little bit about tracking performance. I think this is kind of a question to both the institution and to the companies that are building these programs out. Like, what does a successful intern look like and do during this context, and how does that compare with like a traditional intern dynamic, when they're in the office, maybe doing a little bit more of the task work versus the project work like we already spoke about?
gonna jump in here and then I'm passing to Natasha. I think this is an opportunity for us to make things better. So our traditional way of analyzing performance at the end of the internship was good to see which companies work better with which type of students. But for that particular student, the experience was done. So now that we are communicating so closely and monitoring so closely, we're able to make improvements so that every single student can have a good experience and change a little bit as they go by. So for us, we decided on a weekly performance tracking meeting. So we have 4 people in the career service and in the innovation center. We will be managing about 40 projects over the summer in different schools. As Jordan said, we have liberal arts, business, completely different subject areas. And all of them have to have weekly meetings with us. And we're going to measure what they delivered during that week with what was planned during the the starting week before they meet the employers, to see if they are again on track, if it's working, if it's not working, if anything is needed to for improvements during the internship process. So I really like that now we're able to measure performance as we go instead of just measuring at the end. And of course, we have also employer surveys that we're going to run at the end to see from their perspective if it's working or not. So Natasha, maybe you want to add something here?
Sure. As I mentioned, we have counselors for all of our interns, and they serve in a role to ensure that they're gathering the feedback from the different work assignments that our interns have. They also serve as impartial, right? So they're there to help them navigate the internship. And so, we've shifted the expectations around the role. It's still a similar job. It just looks and feels a little different. How the interns contribute, their attitude, how they ask questions, how they engage, their enthusiasm to help or lend a hand, it's just going to look a little different, but they should still be contributing in some similar ways. So again, we're shifting slightly, but we are still collecting feedback, asking them to engage with their counselors, and we still have similar expectations in how we are asking them to contribute on their teams.
Amazing. I think it's so true, and I think it really brings up this kind of last point here that Alicia brought up, which is, of course, the purpose of an internship is to kind of transition students from education to work. But if work is changing by the minute, how is that going to change the way that these interns need to function and think about their careers and about the professional work environment? So I actually, I want to pose that question to all of you as kind of a final wrap up here, just so you could share a little bit of your perspective of how your piece of the world is changing from a professional perspective, and how maybe, we can prepare students for that world that they are soon to be entering.
I'm happy to jump in. I think, something that we've seen and been thinking about for a decade that has really come to the forefront now is the importance of mental well-being and this notion of meaning and purpose, right? It is like no longer a nice to have for people to have some kind of mindfulness and get support connecting the dots between what they do every day to why it matters in the world. And I think the suffering and the shock that COVID has been, particularly how unequally distributed that suffering has been through our country and globally, it just kicks this whole discussion about stakeholder capitalism and business as a force for good to the next level. And so this generation particularly it's just a non-negotiable. And so, I think what we're really keen on is really easy, open source, low-hanging fruit ways to do that connection to purpose, right? It does not need to be a 6-month, 6-figure, fancy-dancy branding campaign. It can be, it's a very human conversation if you have the right tools. And so I see that as a massive opportunity for companies to attract and keep talent if you're willing to be human and purposeful.
Thanks, Nell.
When I look at the future of work and what's happened with this pandemic, our operating assumptions, those of us who have been in the space of the future of work, was that there was going to be a tidal wave of technological change that was going to create much of the world, the way that work is occurring in the world right now. And it wasn't that, although that hasn't gone away, it was a lightning bolt. And so here we are, all of a sudden, in the face of living with work that has dramatically shifted, whether you've experienced it firsthand yet or not. And there are two key things to think about, both from a company perspective and from a university perspective. The first one is the distinction between past of work being salaried for the large majority of people, and the future of work is entrepreneurial for the large majority of people. And this is both for those of us who are creating scalable companies. So in that sense, in the solopreneur sense, so the trend toward freelance, contract, and independent work over the last several years has the US somewhere between 34 and 45% of people getting much of their income, if not all of their income, from contract work. So the idea that we are preparing folks for a traditional job track or path isn't necessarily the underlying assumption that's going to help people be successful once they graduate. And then thirdly, inside of more traditional organizations like EY and others, the ask of people to be more entrepreneurial in their thinking and how they build projects and how they execute on things is increasing. So helping students prepare for what entrepreneurial means is critically important. And then the second piece is moving away from a career model and a way of thinking about careers, that ladder or the lane. The ladder model was already broken. It has been for years. Again, looking at the dismal happiness or fulfillment statistics. But what we're shifting over into, and what I work with clients on, is the mosaic model of career. It's taking a few steps back. It's helping people figure out what they value the most, what they want their impact to be, and how they want to utilize their talents and skills in the world. And then building a mosaic of ways to execute that around them, which could be a more traditional job, and in most instances is not at all.
I love it, Alicia, and I think I love the concept of the kaleidoscope and mosaic of experiences, because that's really what we are as humans, is that we're just collecting all of this experience and trying to serve the purpose of, the greater good, depending on if that's a priority or otherwise. But I want to take a moment to thank each of you for contributing and being a crucial part of this webinar. This was just a great deal of awesome information to share with companies and educators alike. If you're interested in sticking on for a few minutes, we'll be going over just a few ways that the CapSource team can help you as you navigate the high waters of virtual internships. First and foremost, we're an experiential learning company. And so what that means is we help build experiences that result in high-power learning for students or candidates, depending on how you're looking at young professionals. Traditionally, we do this through our model, which is called industry-integrated project-based experiential learning, to be specific. And what that is the concept of integrating companies into the learning process through organized projects. And so obviously with the pandemic, that entire concept has now been shifted to virtual. But generally, the actual concept doesn't change very much at all. It's still experiential learning. So we have a really great article on our blog. It's also on my personal LinkedIn that talks about this concept of experiential learning and our framework. The key to experiential learning is that the students are using soft skills, like team building skills, as well as relevant tools and technical skills, a lot of those that Alicia shared earlier, to develop real outcomes for real stakeholders. And the key is reference-worthy experience, meaning afterwards the students can talk about this experience on future interviews, put it on their resume, put it on their LinkedIn, and that's what that's really all about, is the way that we build all of our experiences. So for companies, we have a brand new offering, which essentially enables companies to put together teams of interns to work on these types of projects. We have 3 different formats that we offer, but at the very minimum, what you should know is that they're low maintenance, we make them extremely low cost, but they're customized, facilitated, and fully virtual. This single team format, which is similar to our capstone format that we use for universities, enables 2 to 6 students to work on one project throughout a 2 to 10 week period is what we see as the ideal length. This is an example of a capstone project, which is an opportunity for students to work directly with the leadership of a very cool company called Hungry. They've actually done over 7 projects with us with 4 different programs over the course of the last 3 years. In this case, the students were tasked with coming up with a geographic expansion plan. They're operating mostly on the East Coast, and they were trying to figure out where else within the U.S. to expand their corporate catering business. I mentioned earlier that we offer a competition and collaboration format as well. And so the collaboration really provides many teams, many projects, and then the competition provides many teams, one project, and ultimately a fun dynamic that's competitive in nature and ultimately allows the company to kind of recognize the best contributor. So this is an example of a fully virtual experience that we put together for a company called CoinSource. They ultimately engaged 8 teams over a 5-week program. The students came from schools all over the United States. They worked together to come up with a go-to-market strategy for their new B2B platform, which was very different than their current business model. So the way to get started, we created a form on our website, capstonesource.com/create. You choose the format, and then you can customize your order. So where do you want the students to come from? How long should this project last? What topics are you interested in having the students work on? And we will help to build out the program and facilitate the experience. So without further ado, I'd like to end with just a few slides for our educators out there. We do the same process for you as well. We actually call them capstone projects if they're single group opportunities, or live cases if they're multi-group. Of course, the key piece of this puzzle is the educator as a facilitator, so really driving home those concepts, tying it to theory that's taught throughout programs, and providing students with that very important reference-worthy experience. For them, just a simple process to get started. On our website, you click register. It'll walk you through a process of designing an RFP if you're interested in our sourcing and design service, which ultimately matches companies with your requirements, whether it's location requirements, industry requirements, topical requirements, or anything else. To wrap up here, we have also the Adelphi system. Our engagement with Adelphi not only covers the sourcing and design, but also the system. And so our system is designed to make sourcing companies and designing experiences for students much easier. It comes down to being able to manage a repository of companies that are bought into this concept of virtual collaboration and ultimately produce well-defined project scopes. So we're extremely fortunate to be a part of an amazing growing community full of hundreds of companies, thousands of students and educators across institutions around the globe. It really wouldn't be possible without each of you contributing, in your part, the students working extremely hard to deliver outcomes, educators facilitating these experiences, and companies willing to take on students for interesting projects. I also wanted to take a moment to thank my team, especially Abby Goldenberg, our Director of Marketing, who's been answering your questions throughout the session today. Again, none of what we do would be possible without them, and they are extremely unique and eager to just learn as we solve this really crazy challenge of helping students transition from education to work. So lastly, I'd like to end off by just saying we really hope that you're eager to bridge the skills gap with us moving forward. We want to leave students engaged and career ready, companies integrated and involved in the process, and educators and institutions find experiential learning approachable and effective. Thank you again to our speakers. We have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks, which you'll all hear about. But I think this definitely will go down as one of our definitely most amazing speakers and panel discussions that we've had. So thank you to each of you for contributing such unique insights and for shedding some light on kind of what's going on behind the scenes in coordinating these types of meaningful programs. And with that, we'll say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, guys. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.